Hey everybody, how you doing? This is module number 5, and I have to say, I will say it again and again and again. I am just absolutely every week amazed how quickly we seem to be moving along. We're already halfway through the semester. This is like now we're on the downhill slide, and so I just again, I know logically that it is halfway, but it just is like, wow, feels like we just started. And I know that it's hard to keep up. We're grinding through, we're pushing through. I've seen some great work from some of you guys, and so many of you are doing great job of sticking up and keeping up with everything. So continue that. And again, if you do need anything, please make sure you're reaching out. Okay. Let's take a look at what Module 5 is and what we have going on. And this week, we're looking at peer responding and revising. So when we talk about revising, we're really talking about two processes, right? So we're really talking about the ability to go in and say, here is what I can do to improve the message, right? Making it longer, making it more in depth, reorganizing it, adding in new sources, developing ideas. The first step is to global edit, is to make sure that our message is complete. The second piece then is the mechanical editing. That's the periods and the commas and the spelling and the punctuation and the nuts and bolts of grammar, right? And the idea is that we want to make sure that our message is complete first before we go in and change those commas and things. Because if you went and did that first, and then you went in and you added some more stuff or rearranged some things, we might have some more of those kind of mechanical errors, right? And we'd have to go back and redo that again. So our ultimate goal is to revise the message first, make sure it's really good, and then turn it over to those mechanical things. And what we're really going to focus on this week is that global editing or editing of the message. Okay. I think when we talk about peer editing, peer responding, or peer revising, or peer feedback, any of those you might hear, um, I think the big thing is that we want to give you the chance to put a fresh set of eyes on your paper. You know what you meant to write, right? And you had the background information, you had the additional knowledge, and you can fill in the blanks where another person can't. So I think that's the first goal, to have somebody else's opinion on, is it a complete message or not? Because again, you can fill in a lot of those holes because you already have a lot of that background knowledge, right? Another thing too is I think that when you give someone else the opportunity to look at your paper, you're really allowing somebody else to be objective about your paper, right? You know, I know that if I asked you, I say, hey, what do you think of your paper? And some of you can be like, oh, it just sucks. It's horrible. It's awful. And then if I go, well, let me take a look at it. And then I look, I'm like, oh, you are right. It is awful. You would be really upset. And not because that your paper was or wasn't awful, but because that's really not my place to say, right? Like it's your place to make those judgments on things, right? So when somebody else comes along and makes these kinds of assumptions about your paper, it really can be difficult because it's not what you see in that paper, right? You put blood and sweat and tears into that paper. And even though you might say, oh, it's awful, you really don't mean that. You really are proud of your work, and you want to treasure and value that. Well, when somebody else comes along and doesn't agree with that, that is hard. And so when we talk about peer responding, we're allowing that objective view to come into play, because now somebody else who's not emotionally invested in the work can look at that paper and offer some feedback and things. Now there are some things to think about, that you do have to be honest about what you're saying, but we do have to be tactful in what we're saying, right? So we are going to talk about the message, but not about like arguing the message and what you think and what I think. And we're really looking at, hey, when I look at the message, this is complete or this isn't complete, or here's some things that I would do to improve it. So you've got that. That's what this is going for. You've got our learning tasks, our objectives for this module. Okay, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing here. One of the big pieces that we're going to use is using a website called tutor.com. As an Ivy Tech student, you have access to tutor.com for free. And I forget, it's 25 hours. Yeah, it says right there, 25 hours that you get for free. And you can use it in any class, not just your English class. Anything that you're using any kind of writing for, you can you can access that. Okay. And the link to that is in, it is in Ivy Learn. And there it is right there. What mine looks like, yours will look very similar to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to, now that you have a draft of your paper and as you are working on it, you're going to utilize this source because we want you to be familiar with it, not just peers, but other resources that you might have available to you. When you do get to, so after you've looked at the website and you're pretty familiar with it and you're comfortable with how it works, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go in there and you're going to submit your paper and you are going to, submit your paper and get some feedback, work with a tutor and get some things that you might be able to do to really improve your paper, to really push your paper to the next step, to the next level, right? When you are done, you will write a reflection. Okay. And what that is like, hey, here's what I got out of it, right? Here's what I thought. Here's what I felt. Here's what, this is what I think of my experience with the website. Okay. And it gives you some questions to be thinking about here. This isn't overly long. It's just kind of your take afterwards. Not only do we want you to, experience and to use these other tools that you have access to, but we also want you to see what it's like to have somebody give you some of those feedback, some of those tips, some of those pointers. Okay. You also turn in a transcript of your session. That's here number 15 on how to get that transcript. I know in the past that we've had some trouble with that, getting those in. So if you don't get the transcript, that's not a huge problem as long as you let me know what's up, but definitely the reflection you do have to be doing when you are done. Okay. We do have some information about peer responses. And this kind of gets into the process of how we do it. We talk about why we do it, obviously to get some of that feedback, right? So that, you can walk away with some things like, hey, here's some things that I can do to help better my paper, right? But also too, it gives you a better sense of what the assignment is. So it's like, oh wow, I never thought of doing it that way, or why did they do that? That's kind of cool, right? And so you get another look at the assignment, how somebody else approached it. It's not that yours is right and theirs is wrong or whatever. It's just that that's a different way, and so it gives you a new insight. The fact that you do get to practice evaluative writing. Okay, so it's not just the practice of peer editing, but also to evaluate things. This is good, this is bad, and this is why, right? To be able to look at an object and make those kind of determinations. You will do that a lot in a lot of your other classes where, you might have like, here's a patient treatment plan. What's your take? And that's kind of what this is. You also get some practice in accepting criticism. And I know that that is difficult, being able to get that kind of feedback that you may or may not feel the most comfortable with. So not only are we learning about how to work with other people, but we can kind of get a sense of how we can be better equipped and better able to accept that kind of feedback, to have that kind of person who's like, I'm not totally into your paper and here's why, and that you are able to handle that in a mature manner. And then evaluating writing also helps you about writing, so that you get to see, here's a new approach to writing. Here's something that worked. Here's something that didn't. And it gives you a better sense of how to do things. It does give you some information about the 4 B's. Be tactful, be honest, be specific, and be yourself. Obviously, being yourself, don't try to do things that you're not capable of doing. Focus on the things that you're able to do. And then be tactful, understanding that, this is somebody's blood, sweat, and tears, somebody who's really proud of this work. And we don't want to just go out and trash things, but we do want to be honest. And we want to be, like, look, here's some things that I saw. Here's some things that, might help out. Here's some things that would make this, a better paper for me. And I think the big key here is being specific. For instance, if you say, I'm not really sure that this paper is well organized, or the wording here isn't as strong as it could be, or whatever it might be, right? That you say in paragraph 3, if you look at this, so when you can point back to the paper and you can say, here's a piece that really made me think this. That helps the original writer, because not only do they don't get this kind of criticism without any kind of context, right? They can go back to that place, look at it, and say, okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from, right? If you remember our first major paper that we wrote, the criticism, or like I read it, summarized it, and then reflected on it, here's my reaction to it. That's very much what this is. And again, just like that, where we look back and say, okay, here's what I saw, and this is what sparked that in me. Okay. Um, I do believe that you guys get a lot of value in these peer responses. Okay. I think you get a lot of value when other people take a look at these papers, because again, they're objective, they're fresh eyes, and they can really kind of give you some direction, some very valuable tips. Um, the discussion board. So last week at the end of module 4, you posted the half draft of your paper. Module 5, we're going to go in and we are going to leave some comments on people's papers. Now you'll notice here that there's some questions that you can use to get you started. You are going to pick at least 2 drafts, and you're going to pick at least 3 of these areas to really focus on. Okay. And in your reply, you're going to give them this kind of specific feedback. Now, remember, again, we want to be honest. This conclusion really worked, or this conclusion didn't work, or it didn't grab my attention. But then why? How? So if you say, hey, look, here's your introduction and it didn't really get my attention. For instance, you use this as an attention getter, but really you didn't go much in depth, and you should have drawn that out some more and given us a better look at it. So as long as you are honest and tactful, but you point to specific places, I think you're going to get a lot out of it. In the end, I don't want to see peer responses that focus on this idea is bad because, right? Or when we're going to argue the topic. We're not going to argue the topic. We can agree and disagree, and we can say people did a great job on things or people didn't do a good job on something. We can talk about that and give people those very specific pointers, but we don't want to use this as a place to debate the topic, right? That's just kind of, we want to make sure that we're keeping our focus on the assignment. Again, as you are doing this, please remember that on the rubric for this, you want to go in on multiple days. Now, that shouldn't be too much of a problem since most of you have already been on and done your draft, and now you're coming back and doing your responses, that you want to have fully developed answers, and that you are doing more than the minimum. The minimum is 2, but if you want a chance at full points, then you definitely have to do more than 2. I would also ask that as you are looking for people whose papers to respond to, that you think about how many responses they already have. If you take the first 3 and they've already got 10 responses each, think about going farther down and finding someone with only 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, because that will help spread that feedback around and give more people more opportunities to get some feedback that might help them improve their paper. And then we don't just repeat this comparative analysis, the overview of what the assignment is. Again, in the end, this is going to be 1,000 words. Okay. You're going to have a well-developed, fully defined, well-documented explanation and comparison of these 2 articles, right? You want to really make sure that you've shown what those articles are and what the overlap is or isn't and why that is significant. And then you will turn in that final draft on the very end. Okay. Some things to think about when you're looking at that final draft. Just some general tips. Think about the introduction. Make sure there's a very clear attention getter, and that the thesis gives us a sense of what we are going to be looking at and why. Like, what is the thing we're looking at? Your thesis is probably going to be looking at that significance piece, right? Like where they overlap or where they don't, and why. The introduction should also include the name of both of the articles that you're comparing. Okay. Don't forget this paper is to be in MLA style. I'm sorry, MLA or APA style, doesn't matter which one, but it does have to be in one of those, right? So make sure that you are doing that you're putting it in style. Those are points that if you don't put it in style, you're just going to lose automatically. Don't forget also that you have to have the reference or the MLA works cited page at the end. Even though all the way through the text you have been referring to the article, you need to have that full formal citation at the end. Inside the paper, as you are referring to the text, and I know this is kind of a gray area because you're like, Zelenko says in his article, right? And that's the author's last name. And if you go to the works cited, there it is, right? I know that in general you could probably get away with that, but I think it's always better to put in those in-text citations whenever you can. Not only does it, kind of, your reader kind of expects to see those kind of parentheses at the end of integrated material, but it also signals that shift from their work back to my work, right? So you have that lead in, that introduction, according to Zelenko in his article, whatever, and then the information, right? So really think about how you can do that. As you are introducing sources, think about how you can establish their credentials and also build up that context, right? According to Zelenko, the author of whatever article, he talks about food deserts and how they really impact the most vulnerable residents in that area. In his article, he states, bam, here's the quote, right? Then that citation. I think if you can give some commentary after that citation, that really helps, because then we can see that not only did you understand it, but you understand how it applies to your paper. So then you can kind of wrap it up by saying, it's obvious that food deserts are impacting the poorest people, but the poorest people are also the people that don't have the voice to make that change. And that's where the problem lies. So you give that context and those credentials before you give the integrated material, and then you cite it. And then afterwards you comment on it. Give us that kind of your take on it. Some other things to think about is, just again, proofread, run your paper through a spell checker, run it through Grammarly, use the tools that you have, the tutor.com or whatever, other people. You don't want the little errors to define your paper and to be what the reader sees more of. Instead of your ideas, they see little errors, right? And then finally, I think just in the end, remember, this is a comparison. So you have to give us that summary first, the summary of the other article, and then you have to talk about how they're similar or different and why that matters. So please make sure that you really have those pieces together, because that allows me to see that you understood both articles, you understood where those comparisons are and what those comparisons say about the articles. Okay. As you are working on this module, please make sure to remember that if you have any questions at all, that you're reaching out, you're emailing me, which is always the best way, jdwells@ivytech.edu, or you use that communication button inside of Ivy Learn, that you are reaching out, you're saying, hey, here's what I need help with, so that I can deliver that help to you. I don't want you to suffer in silence, okay? I want to give that help to you, but please make sure that you are, when you run into something, that you do, that you kind of, you recognize that and that you address that. Okay. So please don't let that get away from you. Also, don't forget, there's still some questions about the due dates. The due dates are midnight on Sunday night in your time zone. Now, when there's a discussion board and we have an initial post and then we have responses, the initial posts will be done early in the week. I think I also made like your tutorials and your little quizzes off the content. Those are due midweek as well. But you want to make sure that you're really hitting that Sunday night deadline. It is Sunday night, midnight, your time. Okay. So everybody, I hope you have a great week. I've been seeing some great things from you, and I hope that you continue that. And again, if you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out. Good luck, everybody.